Welcome to the Deep Dive, everybody. Today we're going deep, really deep into the world of Erik Prince, a name that brings up, well, private military companies, and a lot of controversy and intrigue all across the globe, really. We've had a lot of requests to break down just who he is and what he's done and why it all even matters. So we got an expert.
Yeah, it's going to be a complex story, that's for sure.
I'm ready. I did a bit of research, and honestly, the thing that struck me right away was Prince's background. Like, talk about not your average upbringing, a wealthy family, super politically active. You kind of have to wonder if that's what shaped everything he did later on. I mean, his sister was Betsy DeVos, right? Secretary of Education under Trump. So that kind of conservative political influence, was that just all around him growing up?
Oh, absolutely. The Prince family were and still are huge financial backers of hardcore conservatives, like the Family Research Council. You really can't understand Erik Prince's path without that context.
Okay, so strong political leanings, check. Then you add in his time as a Navy SEAL, deployments to Haiti, the Middle East, the Balkans. Sounds like a movie, right?
Yeah.
But it was during the Yugoslav wars, and I thought this was really interesting, that he saw a gap in the market, a need for private military training. So first of all, what kind of person becomes a SEAL? And how did that experience lead to his business ideas?
He actually said once, he always had that entrepreneurial drive. It was almost like being a SEAL was just like an outlet for it, But yeah, seeing how traditional military support just wasn't cutting it during the Balkan conflicts, that's where the business opportunity clicked for him.
So he saw a problem and figured out a solution, but a very specific, and some would say controversial one. Which brings us to Blackwater. And I read that the Rwandan genocide was a motivating factor in him starting the company. How does something that horrific lead to a private military company?
Well, it's complicated. He has said, he was profoundly impacted by the Rwandan genocide, just the sheer horror of it. And he felt that just standing by, doing nothing in the face of such tragedies, it was unacceptable. He thought private companies could step in and provide that security, provide the training that might prevent similar things from happening again. Now, whether that was truly how he felt or just, good business strategy, it's hard to say definitively.
Right. It's filling a need, but also a massive business opportunity.
Yeah.
Especially as the war on terror ramped up after 9/11 and Blackwater really blew up, right? Getting billions in government contracts. Did they change the game for private military companies? Were they doing something totally new?
I mean, their rise was definitely fast, but they weren't the only ones. What set them apart was just the scale, the scope. They had thousands of personnel providing everything: security for embassies, bases, training for foreign troops, even working directly for the CIA. They even had a private shooting range near CIA headquarters. That kind of money, that kind of influence, it was unprecedented. Never seen before for a private company in that sector.
Wow, talk about power. But you know what they say? With great power comes great scrutiny. And for Blackwater, that scrutiny really exploded with the Nisour Square massacre in 2007, when their employees opened fire in a crowded Baghdad square, killing 17 Iraqi civilians. That changed everything, how people saw the company and Erik Prince himself. So what happened legally after that? Did Blackwater just disappear?
Well, the Nisour Square massacre triggered a ton of investigations, lawsuits, criminal convictions even for some of the guards who were involved. It brought up huge questions about accountability, about the use of force by these private contractors. Their reputation was shattered. They ended up selling Blackwater, and it went through a couple of rebrandings, became Academia eventually. But the legal issues, they kept coming. In 2012, Academia had to pay almost $50 million to settle charges for arms trafficking violations, things that happened back when Prince was CEO. And then get this, in 2020, the FBI started looking into Prince again for allegedly converting crop dusters into military aircraft, potentially violating arms export laws.
So yeah, Nisour Square, it definitely cast a long shadow over Blackwater and their whole legacy. Even with the name changes, they couldn't outrun it. But Prince, he didn't exactly shy away from controversy after that, did he?
You could say that again. What he did after Blackwater, it gets even more, interesting, more complex, more tangled up in global affairs.
Okay, so that's where we're heading next. Stick with us as we dive even deeper into the world of Erik Prince, from Blackwater's downfall to his super controversial ventures all over the globe.
After Blackwater, it's like Prince shifted gears internationally. 2010, he moves to Abu Dhabi. The Crown Prince actually invited him. And that move, it's key to understanding what came next.
Okay, why leave the U.S., though? Was he just looking for, a clean slate? Or was it more strategic?
Oh, definitely strategic. I mean, think about it. He's outside U.S. jurisdiction immediately, right?
Yeah.
But he's got access to this huge growing demand for security services, Middle East, Africa. Plus, he's building relationships with some pretty powerful people, the UAE government, all that.
So, new base of operations, new network, maybe a little more freedom to operate than back in the U.S. But did he stay in the private military world?
He did. He starts training foreign troops in Abu Dhabi, like a force of 2,000 Somalis, getting them ready for anti-piracy operations in the Gulf of Aden. And this is important. This program was funded by a bunch of Arab countries, the UAE included. But get this, it also had backing from the U.S.
So even though he's training foreign forces, there's still this connection back to U.S. interests. What about his move into, like, private equity in Africa? He starts Frontier Resource Group, right?
Yeah.
And they've got ties to the Chinese government. How does that fit into all this?
Prince saw the writing on the wall. African economies growing, tons of Chinese investment pouring in, big opportunity. And with Frontier Services Group, this logistics and transport company he was running, he wanted a piece of the action. Except his work in Africa, well, it got messy, more controversy.
All right, let's get into that. What specifically was raising red flags? I remember something about an oil refinery and arms deals in South Sudan.
Yeah, you're remembering right. He was involved in this diesel refinery project in South Sudan. Went nowhere, though. Too much political instability. But the arms deals, now those are even more controversial. He sold 3 Mi-24 attack helicopters, 2 L-39 jets, even supplied Hungarian mercenary pilots to fly them, all to the South Sudanese government.
Yikes. Especially with the civil war raging there, the human rights abuses, all that. Did he face any legal blowback for that?
It's tricky. Yeah, these actions were ethically and legally questionable, violating UN arms embargoes even, but nothing's really stuck. No formal charges for anything he did in South Sudan.
He's got a real knack for operating in those gray areas.
Yeah.
But then things take this whole other turn. We're talking U.S. politics now.
Yeah.
And the investigations into Russia interfering in the 2016 election. How does Prince get tied up in all that?
That's where things get really, really interesting. He was a major donor to the Trump campaign, gave tons of money to pro-Trump super PACs too, but his involvement goes way deeper than just money.
Deeper how? I mean, there were all these rumors about him setting up back channels between the Trump campaign and Russia. Was there any truth to that?
There's definitely evidence pointing to his involvement. Like, he sets up and attends this meeting at Trump Tower in 2016. Donald Trump Jr. is there, George Nader, this emissary for the UAE, and an Israeli social media specialist. The whole point of the meeting, supposedly for the UAE and Saudi Arabia to help Trump win the election. Then there's the Seychelles meeting, January 2017. Prince meets with Kirill Dmitriev, the head of Russia's sovereign wealth fund, super close to Putin. And that meeting, allegedly part of setting up a back channel between Moscow and the incoming Trump administration.
Those meetings sound shady as hell. Did Prince ever admit to any of this?
Nope. At first, he denied everything, said he had no formal or unofficial role in the Trump campaign. But then evidence comes out. The Mueller report, for example, totally contradicts him. He claimed he wasn't representing the Trump team at that Seychelles meeting, but the special counsel. They found proof that he was lying.
So he's caught in a lie. Were there any consequences for all this? For trying to connect the Trump campaign with Russia?
The House Intelligence Committee basically accused him of lying to Congress, referred him to the Justice Department for possible criminal charges. But, and this is a recurring theme with Prince, nothing happened. No charges.
It's a pattern.
Yeah.
Allegations, investigations, and then nothing. But his activities back in the U.S., they didn't stop there. There's this whole thing about political infiltration operations targeting groups that oppose Trump, right?
2020, the New York Times reported that Prince had recruited former intelligence agents, their mission, to infiltrate groups that were seen as hostile to Trump. Think Democratic campaigns, labor organizations, liberal advocacy groups, the whole 9 yards.
Hold on. He's using former spies to infiltrate political opponents. What, like James Bond stuff? How does that even work?
He worked with Project Veritas. They're this conservative organization known for, well, let's just say controversial sting operations. They put out these deceptively edited videos trying to make liberal groups and media outlets look bad. He helped train Project Veritas operatives, connected them with his network of former spies. The whole thing was a mess.
So private military, international intrigue, and now domestic political espionage? Is there anywhere Erik Prince hasn't left his mark? Good or bad, I mean.
His reach is global, that's for sure. And we haven't even touched on his alleged ties to the Wagner Group. a Russian mercenary outfit, or what he was up to in Libya, trying to prop up a warlord who wanted to overthrow the UN-backed government.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Seriously, his story is like a crazy thriller novel. But let's try to untangle some of it, starting with the Wagner Group. Who are they, and what was Prince's connection to them?
The Wagner Group, they're a private military company, close ties to the Russian government. They've been involved in conflicts all over, Ukraine, Syria, a bunch of African countries.
So, another controversial private military group.
Yeah.
And what exactly was Prince doing with them?
Reports say he offered his services, like as a subcontractor for their operations in Mozambique and Libya, proposed giving them aerial surveillance, a ground force, the whole package.
I mean, it's wild that he'd even consider working with a group that's so close to the Russian government, especially after all his involvement in U.S. politics, criticizing Russia, all that.
Yeah, it's a weird one. Some people think he just saw dollar signs. Others think he had some kind of, I don't know, geopolitical agenda of his own.
It's like he's playing this dangerous game. In a world where allegiances are fluid, the stakes are high.
You got it. And Prince's activities, they really shine a light on just how complicated, how murky this whole world of private military contractors is, and how much influence they have in global affairs. But before we get into all that, let's shift gears to Libya.
Right, you mentioned his support for Khalifa Haftar, that Libyan warlord who was trying to take down the UN-backed government. What exactly was he doing there?
Oh, Prince's involvement in Libya, especially his support for Haftar. That's a whole other can of worms, full of controversy, and a lot of unanswered questions.
Well, let's open that can of worms then. What did his support actually look like? Was he just bankrolling Haftar? Or was he more hands-on, involved in the military side of things?
Oh, it went way beyond money. He's been accused of giving Haftar's forces military equipment, personnel, directly violating a UN arms embargo.
Okay, what kind of equipment are we talking about?
The UN was investigating this whole plan, Project Opus, they called it. Prince was allegedly trying to supply Haftar with a bunch of surplus military helicopters from Jordan, throw in some surveillance aircraft, drones, even cyber intelligence capabilities.
Wow. So he was basically trying to build Haftar a private air force. Did it work?
They shut it down before it got off the ground, but still, it raises all sorts of red flags, right? Yeah. His willingness to just ignore international law, possibly make a really bad conflict even worse.
Every cent of the way, it's like he's testing the limits, pushing the boundaries, seeing what he can get away with.
Yeah, and that's Erik Prince for you.
So he's covered a lot of ground here. Prince involved in conflicts all over the world. But he also had these side ventures, like aviation, logistics. I read about him trying to build a private air force. What's the deal with that?
Well, he always understood how important air power is, especially in places where, infrastructure is lacking. 2014, he buys a stake in this Austrian aviation company, Airborne Technologies, and he gets them to modify Thrush 510G crop dusters, turn them into something a lot more, a lot more lethal.
Wait, he was turning crop dusters into military aircraft? Like, how does that even work?
They add surveillance systems, armor plating, machine guns, even hard points for rockets and bombs, basically a light attack aircraft.
That's insane. Sounds like something straight out of a movie. So what was he going to do with these souped-up crop dusters?
One of them ended up in South Sudan, as far as we know, which, raises some eyebrows considering his history there. The rest, Frontier Services Group has them, but they haven't sold them or deployed them. Probably worried about those pesky U.S. arms export regulations.
Always pushing the limits, isn't he? Finding creative ways to skirt the rules. But it's not all conflict and controversy. I read that Prince has done some philanthropic stuff too, is that right?
Yeah, it's true. He supported some charitable things. A Muslim orphanage in Afghanistan, building mosques at Blackwater bases. Big donor to conservative causes too. Which makes sense considering his family and their deep roots in right-wing politics.
It's hard to wrap your head around it. The charity stuff, alongside everything else he's done, it just makes it even harder to figure out what drives this guy.
Right. He's full of contradictions, generous one minute, ruthless the next, driven by ideology, ambition, and this unshakable belief in his own vision for the world, whatever that vision is.
So we've gone deep on Erik Prince. And honestly, I have more questions now than I did when we started. What's your take on his legacy? Force for good, harbinger of chaos, somewhere in between.
Oh, people will be debating that for years. He's a polarizing figure, no doubt. Love him or hate him, depending on your politics, probably. But one thing's for sure, he's had a massive impact. Changed the game for private military companies, blurred the lines between governments and private interests, and left, well, a pretty big trail of controversy wherever he goes.
His story really makes you think about how we use force, about holding powerful people accountable, about the ethics of, well, privatizing war. What's the takeaway for our listeners?
Erik Prince's story, it's a wake-up call. We need to look closely at what these private companies are doing in conflict zones, hold them accountable. We got to scrutinize the people pulling the strings too, especially the ones with close ties to governments and intelligence agencies. If we want to understand the faces shaping our world, we have to understand people like Erik Prince.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Expert speaker, thanks so much for walking us through all this. I learned a lot.
Happy to do it.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, maybe even a little disturbing. The world of Erik Prince. It's a wild ride, full of intrigue, ambition, and a whole lot of controversy. Keep exploring, stay curious, and keep asking the tough questions. That's it for us. Thanks for listening.